Thank you for joining us for today's Aga Khan Education Board podcast, where we will be discussing how to prepare for the future of work. In today's podcast, the Aga Khan Education Board will be joined by leading experts in this field. I am Leila Ratnani from the Aga Khan Education Board, and I will be your host and moderator for today's discussion. I'm delighted to be joined by colleagues from Henley Business School and Bright Network. We will be joined by James Uffindell, founder of Bright Network. James is a technology entrepreneur and one of the UK's leading experts in entry-level talent for this market. James has over 20 years of experience and has helped over 1 million students apply for blue-chip companies and leading universities. James founded Bright Network in 2013, a career network based on data and insights to help build our future workforce. We are also joined by Dr. Naeema Pasha. Naeema is the Director of Careers and the World of Work at Henley Business School and manages a team of development career specialists. Naeema is currently researching on AI and the future of work and is working on a big piece with EY on skills-led recovery. Thank you both for joining us today and welcome to our podcast. Naeema, if I can begin with you, thinking about our working patterns currently, I would say that we probably are a little bit old school in our ways of working.
Leila, thank you so much for having me as well. It's delighted to be here, first of all. Yeah, you know, your point that you just said now, I would completely agree. I think we're in a modern society. Obviously, we're here now in 2020, but we're still structuring work around the last century of work, which was required, the things that were required for an industrial age. So you had to be in a workplace to do the work. So the 5-day week, for example, the 9-to-5 workday was developed around a 20th century model of working. So the creation of the weekend, for example, was initially pushed for by worker unions in the US about 100 years ago as a way of giving employees better life. And plus, of course, then, you know, you had to go to a factory in order to work. So I completely agree with your point, Leila, that while we're seeing a transformation of work, the recent history of work is kind of worth looking at to see if we are still, as you say, kind of a little bit old school in our thinking. I mean, from the start, so just to go a little bit, just to give people who are listening and watching a bit of a background on this, it's worth reviewing. So from the start to the middle of the last century, in the age of mass manufacturing, you know, you'd recruit people. The James of the olden days would have recruited people who had a similar skill set. They're working on identical jobs. Job roles were consistent quite often and not changing scope over many years. And during this period, firms operated in hierarchies and workers are managing tight boundaries. Then things started to change, and later in the 20th century, flexibility grew, organisations grew towards more customer-centric operation. You'd have, therefore, innovations and systems started moving a little faster, and then leaders started heading up teams that had workers with a range of different skills and knowledge. And the James who was working in that time would have been looking at workers that looking at the skills they had to see if they applied, and then they reapplied those skills in different scenarios and different job areas and different organisations. So the boundaries between jobs, roles and organisations became more blurred. But now we're the 21st century, particularly this stage of the 21st century, we're really seeing a huge shift, which is why, you know, we're discussing the kind of things that we're discussing. The shift that we have now with the upheavals of AI, on, you know, the impact of artificial intelligence, automation, and robotics in the workplace is huge. But we're also now experiencing this huge upheaval that we're living at the moment through coronavirus. So what we would say, what my research is looking at, is that work has moved from just being boundaryless to a really uncertain, hyper-connected, hyper-competitive, increasingly tech-enabled world. So companies and workers who display agility, I feel, are the ones we can see through now who are going through COVID and surviving, perhaps even thriving, are adapting or taking advantage of digital technologies, and they are more successful. So I think really what we're looking at now is a really adaptable, adaptability as being our watchword.
Thank you, Naeema. And James, from your perspective, working with a number of young people, what would you say the world of work looks like for them now picking up on Naeema's points about adaptability and agility.
Absolutely. So at Bright Network, we've got over 320,000 young people. So these are mainly Gen Z, aged 18 to about 24, 25. And I think there are going to be some huge challenges, but also huge opportunities in the ever-changing world of work. And if you think about the most recent revolution for humans, so firstly we had the cognitive revolution when our brains started working better, then we had the farming revolution, then we had the industrial revolution, and then we've had a communications revolution. And this kind of revolution, what it means for the world of work, I think is, exactly to Naeema's points, we're no longer kind of Victorian industrialists getting workers to turn up and be there 9 till 6. Companies who are going to compete and people who are going to compete in the modern economy need to be utilising their brain power in the very, very best possible way. So it's challenging in terms of the change of the world of work, because we've got, quite frankly, a lot of the jobs that are now just won't be relevant to graduates and young people coming out of school in terms of as they go into kind of the world of employment. So if you look at the 1800s, very roughly, I think it was like 90% plus of jobs were on farms in the US, and now it's something like 2% of jobs. And back then they couldn't even conceive of jobs like kind of web developers and marketing specialists and all these roles that exist now. So there's a lot of estimation. It's very hard. No one knows exactly, but a lot of the roles that are relevant now just aren't going to be relevant for the future. So what that means, if you're a young person now going into the world of work, is you need to focus on essentially kind of resilience and adaptability and emotional intelligence, how to understand kind of other humans. And that adaptability point is absolutely critical going into that world of work. And we do a lot of research at Bright Network on our members and what they think, and flexibility is really critically important in terms of if you want to get the best talent into your organization. So, and we've seen through the COVID-19 crisis, what is actually possible where you are, where you're running a team remotely. And we actually never call it working from home, because we always think working from home sounds a bit like people kind of at home, kind of watching Netflix, etc. So it's always working remote. So there's a business called Automatic. I think they've got a team of over 2,000 people. They call it distributed all the way through the world. And now, as long as you've got like this, hopefully a stable broadband connection, and you've got great collaboration tools like Slack and Zoom, it's very exciting. So there's going to be these challenges, and a lot of jobs are going to no longer exist. But then what that means, so through the COVID-19 crisis, on our team at Bright Network, I think the number's 43% felt more productive because they can run their lives and quite frankly, sack off the commute. I mean, I always personally used to think commuting was a wonderful thing because, you could do emails and podcasts, but actually it's grinding. It takes energy from physical energy, mental energy. So lots of opportunities to come, but definitely some challenging times. But the history of the human race is about evolving, adapting, changing, which is how we've got here. So I think we need to stay very optimistic about things.
One of the conversations we've been having at work has been around how things have been accelerated, and to the point of where we might have been in 10 or 20 years, it's actually been fast tracked to where we are now. So to your point of the working remotely, perhaps that's something where we would have ended up anyway. And Naeema, perhaps you can talk to some of the longer term trends that you're seeing in the market currently, and the pieces that you're working on also with your research.
Sure. I mean, I think both of you made absolutely really important points about this shift of what COVID's done. It's not that we want to say, this is a good thing that's happened to push us into these things, but it's forced us to think about work very differently. And the kind of tech adoption that we're having is sort of certain things have been accelerated. And it's not just our work, but our lifestyles as well. So the kind of things that we're expecting to see is that we're seeing more innovations really influencing our work and lifestyle. So the kind of things that we know, and James will know a lot as well about the kind of practices. So facial AI, for example, assessing personality in recruitment is growing, and that will probably grow further because more remote recruitment, where people are having to make kind of a more in-depth judgments, but from a distance. Conversational AI is something I'm looking into at the moment, and looking at our voice assistants such as Siri, Alexa. At the moment we're freely talking to them about updates about the weather or the football results, or play a song or something like that. I have to be careful in case it goes off. but actually what we will be doing soon is talking to our Alexas and our hubs as colleagues, if you like, in the workplace. So ahead of us is a lot more disruptive technology, and we've had some interesting news in, just lately about 5G providers. But if we just take out the politics of it, we know that this technology is projected to have an enormous impact on business and work, and it's going to enable really extraordinary fast networking, creativity, creating connections between billions of different devices. So what we might find as we progress forward is that if we're looking to maintain the kind of things that we would have experienced, a lot of people say there isn't a new normal, it's just going to be the same, but these huge shifts will have made impact in our psyche at least. And we might think, when we want to go back, when workplaces open more, that we may still want to protect our health, for one thing, but we may also want to protect this lifestyle of remote working, as James has called it, and sack-offing commutes and so on. So you could be using data-rich technologies such as VR, Microsoft HoloLens, for example, is looking at it's a few years off yet, but instead of this Zoom, which is doing us good now, but we could have a kind of human way of connecting when you've got an actual kind of, you be kind of more physical in our presence, and it could create a completely new way of working with each other, this current video conferencing. So I think this, coupled with the kind of ideas around the Internet of Things, smart cities, smart healthcare, and then smart work, we could really see a whole range of interesting things. And one of the things that we really want to look at, I think, is about inequality as well, and that's for jobs, and it's also for health. And some of the people that are saying that actually, if we could start looking at AI and technology such as 5G, could we also use it to reduce inequalities and even maybe, I don't know, manage pandemics better?
James, do you have anything to add from the trends that you're seeing working with the individuals that you are?
Yeah, absolutely. So we saw a big drop in confidence. So when kind of COVID-19 hit, we saw confidence about getting a job when students graduate fell from 57% to 36%. And our labour market is actually still broken in so many ways. So in terms of 47% of Black students on our network still feel their background has hindered them in the application process. So to Naeema's point there about kind of equality and making sure that everybody catches up. And a big theme we're seeing actually is it's sometimes Finder for the kind of, the slightly kind of older generation. So, often, they're a bit further in their careers and they've got, nice places to work, and they quite frankly, they have an okay time. But the younger generation, if you're in a kind of a shared house and it's your first job, how do you, and actually you want, and then make sure they are learning from the kind of the more experienced leaders is really, really critical. So I think that the challenge with all this is how do we take the best parts of what we've learned and then stick that on the good things that were there before. So I completely agree. I think it's been expedited in terms of change of behavior. And I think that now things are quite frankly a lot more efficient, because rather than having to trek to a meeting, you can get people together easy. I think to Naeema's point, the tools are really important. Yeah. So yeah, I completely agree with the points Naeema was just saying, particularly around kind of diversity and access and making sure that everybody is brought on this I think is going to be quite an exciting journey about how technology empowers humans more, which has been the history of technology, and long may that continue. So to those 2 points, so 47% of Black students on our network still feel their backgrounds is holding them back. Also younger people, it's really important that they get access to those senior leaders, because if you think how they develop in that learning environment of, normally an office, how that works, it's really important that they kind of have that access and connectivity. So the question now becomes, really excitingly, how do we take the things we've learned through lockdown, which I think is hopefully better productivity in terms of not having to do the commute, and also the distraction and noise in the office. There's been some research saying that in a typical office, in a typical day, only 2 hours of actual work gets done by the time you've got there, had the small talk, had the kind of all the faffing around. And if you think about it, like, you have a meeting, you sit down, you go to the laptop, you have a meeting again, and establishing that flow, which has been proven through all the neuroscience, the sense of flow, we really focus on something. And for us, when we came up with Internship Experience UK, which has now delivered 1 million hours of online learning, it had over 100,000 applications. And that came because we were able to be out of the noise and think, okay, how can we respond really strategically and do something big? So we were able to spend about 6 weeks working on it. And then we launched it, and it's just been phenomenal for our business, and also supporting the young people, and just it's kind of how do you come up with those interesting ideas? So there's going to be lots of benefits, but we need to make sure that we bear in mind the inclusivity and diversity point 100%. We make sure young kind of people come on the journey, but overall I think it's a very actually exciting development. And Pareto optimality says in economics there's no such thing as something that's purely good or bad. There is basically good or bad in pretty much everything, and there'll be some things that overall obviously good or obviously bad. So overall, obviously, the COVID-19 crisis has been horrific. It's been saddening. It's been so sad, so horrific and sad. However, what can we take from it? So can we get a workforce that is more engaged, more productive, maybe doing less work on more important things? I mean, wouldn't that be wonderful? And also for Britain, how do we solve the productivity crisis? And I think actually the Brits are incredibly good at being creative and entrepreneurial and adaptive. And actually, how can we learn a lot of lessons through this to hopefully create a better working environment for everybody?
Thank you, James. I know from my own perspective and my own experiences, having come from a legal background and working in that field for a number of years, and moving then into marketing, which I'm now almost at 10 years, showing my age. But from a skills perspective, I feel like I was really able to do that from what I learned from my legal career and those skills that I was able to pick up and transfer over. So if I can stick with you for just a second and push you a little bit on the skills that you think that young people today will need to survive in the workplace, regardless of what that workplace might look like, whether it is remote working or it is that we end up back in the office, but just how do we think that people can survive in today's world of work?
So every year we survey Bright Network students on what they think is important, and they think in terms of what's important to employment is the first and foremost thing is getting a 2-1. Then they think it's industry experience. Then they think it's communication skills. And then we ask the employers. So the students have put a 2-1 at number 1. The employers actually put it at number 6. So they actually aren't that bothered about if someone's got a 2-1 or not. Interestingly, the most important thing is communication skills that they put, and then they put passion for the business and problem solving skills, which students only think is number 7. And then the most interesting one for me is employers put resilience at number 4. So they actually think resilience, and we've had a lot around Generation Snowflake, which I think is a quite frankly a load of nonsense, because they're an incredibly tenacious generation. It's just about working out what really motivates them, which just is a bit of intellectual work, I think. So employers want number resilience as number 4, but students think it's only a number 11. So answer your question, we asked employers, and the most important thing is to focus on our communication skills. So how do you interact with other humans, essentially? Understanding the business you're applying for, being good at problem solving. So how do we get creative problem solving? And then resilience. And the next one's actually commercial awareness. So I think if students can really work on those skills, I think they'll be set for hopefully a really kind of happy, successful working life. And I think the other thing that's going to happen is, quite frankly, I think the whole concept of work-life balance is a nonsense. I think, again, it goes back to this Victorian time where, you would go to the factory from 9 till 6 and to work to earn money to be able to live. And, that understandably is what people need to do back then. Now, the number one thing that CEOs think about from Harvard Business Review survey, it is talent. So quite frankly, if you've got the talent, you're going to be fine. And actually, you should really, we only all have a certain number of hours and days on this amazing existence called life. We're all going to be asked to move on at some point. So actually, the idea between a work-life balance, I think, just doesn't exist. And you can now manage your life where you're doing what you want doing, and maybe you'll go to the gym on a Friday afternoon, and maybe you'll be working on a Sunday evening. So that ties again into flexibility and technology and collaboration, and how we're able to work in a better way together.
And it sounds very much to me that the fact that the skill set is expanding so much also means that we can open up a lot more to the more vulnerable communities who feel like they had a barrier to entry initially. And so this is really something quite hopeful and positive for them as well.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And access is critical. And we've seen, interestingly, working with the employers and making sure they get the very best kind of brain power. What's happened is employers have moved, quite frankly, from just going to certain universities and certain campuses and kind of almost being quite narrow, and now to actually understanding that the kind of talent is everywhere, opportunity is not. And to Naeema's point there on psychometrics as a selection tool, it's something we're kind of pioneering at Bright Network, because actually people can kind of blag and bluff their way through interviews, and how you discover talent. And interesting, Ray Dalio, who's the founder of Bridgewater, he's one of the most successful business people ever. I think his net worth is something like 50 billion. He says basically he had to choose between data and essentially psychometrics when he's assessing who should work for him, or the other stuff. He would just go for the kind of data all the time. So yeah, it's a very, very exciting time now, and to connect talent and opportunity.
And Naeema, I know you're doing a lot of work in the technology space, and I think that really feeds into the data piece that James was talking about, because we know that data drives Bright Network, but it also drives so many different aspects of the world of work and the way that we operate in a daily manner. So it'd be really great for you to talk about how technology is playing into the skill set for the future.
Sure. There's a few that, well, in terms of data, we did a really interesting piece last summer at Henley Business School, piece of research on the 4-day week and Generation Z, the four generations of the workplace. And it was quite interesting, some of the things that came through there in terms of data, all aligning exactly to what James talked about, but actually the productivity goes up when you give people more autonomy and flexibility and give them more time to be themselves. And in terms of sometimes the skill set, I'm going to introduce a slightly strange skill set, but having time to be yourself, if you start developing your own non-work persona, is actually quite critical, because again, going back to the Industrial Revolution, or even, back to the 80s, when people used to say, I'm an IBMer. Do you remember that kind of advert that went out quite a lot to say, I'm an IBMer? And there's alignment now with certain firms, I am such and such and such and such, but actually what we're looking for is identity, that you contribute to that organization, but you also develop your own identity as well. And that is really fantastic for employers and for you to develop your own profile. And the work I've done actually on skills, answering your question rather, is that literally just finished some research on this, and again it aligns exactly to what we talked about now. And my research was pretty looking at career resilience, looking at how if we got all these kind of changes happening around us, what kind of things do we need to have? We need this kind of career resilience to withstand these changes in order to do well. And some of the things that came from there were not the kind of, exactly as James said, get you 2-1, get you this, get you that. It's actually looking at a set of skills to understand yourself well. So it's understanding your own qualities. So I would say to all the people listening, is really kind of review or work with people to understand what your own personal qualities are, and look at those positively. Actually, my research is called positive mindset, about your positive appreciation of own skill set. So it's assessing that and knowing that's really critical. But looking at how you engage with other people, relationship building was absolutely really important. So opportunities to develop those human qualities, because that's really, as a lot of literature say, separate us off from the AI or robotic technology. And that's about relationships and building connections, and through that you've got to have an understanding and empathy for other people. So I'd say to people who are listening, if you want to develop those relationship skills, start working with people on some joint projects and seeing what you can offer, to say, what can I bring to this and how can I make it better, and kind of think about that quite regularly. And I'd say one of the most critical things from my research that came through in the research that we're doing is the two most important skills, I'd say. And number one is a learning mindset, and that applies to everybody. And it also applies to organizations. That's actually the work I'm doing with EY as well at the moment, about learning organizations, because in order to adapt, change, and come out of that adaptation well, you've got to sort of have taken information in, learn how to adapt it and move on. And that's really what learning is. And keeping that, it's a cliched term of lifelong learning, but if we look at it, that you just keep this open learning mindset, that you're taking new information, you're gathering new skills, that's really critical. And the other one is knowing how to adapt, because if you have an adaptability strength, you're able to sort of like work and do things and actually survive well, and in a way try and enjoy things as much as possible as well through those two activities.
It's so interesting that you talk about lifelong learning. As the Education Board in the United Kingdom jurisdiction, we've actually built a platform called Head Start that promotes exactly that, because we want to encourage continuous learning, and of course it helps with your brain development, and it helps with career skills, it helps with just your general life skills. So there are so many different aspects that can be looked at under that. So I'm really grateful that you raised that as being one of your your number one skill sets for moving forward.
And just to add quickly to that, because we're looking at people, we've talked a lot about younger people and going to the workplace, and that is essential, but we're going to hopefully live longer, and work is going to change. So people may have joined an organisation. Say if you join Marks and Spencer now, or retail, you know, we know that's so much upheaval. Even if you're mid-career, it's kind of the learning mindset will enable you to sort of withstand those changes as you go through on your career, which hopefully will be lifelong. So people who are listening, who are perhaps mid-career, later career, all these things still apply.
There's a wonderful book called The 100-Year Life, which I'm sure the two of you have read, which is by Professor Linda Grattan. And that is a fascinating read. It would be up there probably for me with probably with Sapiens, as just thinking about the future. And so a child born now has a 50% chance of hitting 100. And what the book basically explains, which is kind of obviously, I think we can all see it, but it's nice when you have academics really look at this in depth. There's the idea of a 3-stage life: education, career, and then retirement. It is quite frankly nonsense now, because you know, if you're going to potentially live to 100, then you could be, you know, retire at 60, then you could be, you know, retired for as long as you're working. And that's why, I love the continued learning points. And I completely agree. It's not just for the kind of Gen Zers and the millennials, it's for all of us, how we adapt. And I went through that recently actually with, you know, I've been an entrepreneur. I started my first business, my student bedroom. I built that, I sold that. And then I started Bright Network, and it was going nicely, but I just quite frankly didn't have the management skills, and I didn't have the, I call it just the expertise. So I did a course that Goldman's provide called the 10,000 program, and delivered by business schools. So yeah, and what the business schools doing like Henley is obviously absolutely fantastic. And it was a short program. And I think it really has been a great way for us to accelerate, because, you know, we've now raised about £8 million of funding, and we're growing really quickly. And part of that, I think, is quite frankly me, you know, letting other people get on with things, quite frankly, you know, like in terms of, you know, the delegation points. It's kind of, you know, released all this creativity in our organization. So yeah, ongoing learning is a wonderful theme to think about.
Thank you. And just as we start to come to the end of our podcast, I wanted to reach out to both of you and ask what your parting words were, both to our younger listeners, but also to those that may be midlife and they're looking at potential career moves, or just thinking about the current situation and how they might adapt to that. So James, if I could start with you with your closing comments, please.
So optimism. I know it's hard, and particularly in the environment we're in, but optimism to think about, which ties into the growth mindset, is, you know, this too shall pass. And there's a wonderful John Paul Sartre quote, which is people get the war they deserve. And I actually, in terms of my learning, used a lockdown to get a bit into existentialism, doing a course, and yeah, so that optimism about the future, I think, is critical. Secondly, thinking longer term in careers. I think people often will think about the next pay rise, the next promotion, but actually thinking what are your values and where you want to get to in terms of that developing and proceeding, and actually making sure your career is aligned with those values, I think. And the third point is just curiosity, just staying curious all the time about yourself, your own thoughts, what's going on when you meet people. Being as curious as possible is critical. So those would be my three.
Amazing, thank you. And Naeema, what would your parting comment?
Thank you. So it's quite nice going after James, so I can I can link to what he's just done. I'm going to go a bit more focused actually, just on where we are at the moment, because that was a really good general point. So I don't want, let's leave that. That's fantastic. I'd say this experience of the pandemic has shown us certain things that don't need to be done in the workplace, but it also shows actually the things that we want to have as humans. So whilst we have endless Zooms and other things, we are finding it a little bit fatiguing and tiring. You know, so I think what we've learned from this is not just that we don't need to be in the workplace, but actually we do need to connect with other humans in order to do specific things. It's not to put Excel spreadsheets together. It's to do creativity, it's to do collaboration, and also caring. I've got 3 C's there: creativity, collaboration, and caring. And I'd say those are the things that we can start working on. Now we've got this new mindset of what happens post, well, not post, you know, we're living the pandemic, but as we move forward, I think that's what we focus on. Technology should enhance those things, and that's what we have to work together on.
Thank you so much to both of you. It's been such an enlightening conversation, and I hope that all of our listeners really benefit from what you have shared with us today. So thank you so much on behalf of the Education Board for taking the time to
Pleasure. Thank you.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for the opportunity. It's been a really good conversation.